from Pete and ask one myself, and then we'll wrap up. Pete, did you have a question?
The point I was trying to make was it strikes me that most of the healthcare cost problems, the big ones, are structural in nature. They're long-term in nature. And while we have an objective to make healthcare reform deficit neutral, what do you think the odds are that we will instead add to our aggregate deficit debt problems? Because we will add the costs, but we won't get the cost savings on a short to medium term basis. What do you think the odds are of that possible combination?
The history of every piece of medical legislation is that the costs are higher than projected. Sure. And that I think we were talking at lunch, don't think we should forget that this is basically a redistributionist program. We're basically increasing the coverage. That is the primary goal of health care. We're increasing the cost to cover people who aren't covered. Now, that's a legitimate goal, but unless it's combined with meaningful cost containment, you're just going to have a repeat of every other medical piece of legislation in the past.
So you think deficits will rise?
I mean, from what I've seen so far of the cost containment side, since, again, to get into the budgetary talk, some of it's dynamic. It requires 10 things to happen before you get the savings, as opposed to just cutting the program.
I think one of the things nobody talks about is that the insatiable demand for health care, and at some point, we're going to have to ration health care. I mean, it's a horrible thing to say in this country, but the demand is infinite, and as long as we put as amount of money we put into terminal illness, it just won't work, particularly as this huge group of people move into the post-65 period.
Like you and me.
Like you and me.
Anything further? I have a question for Gillian. As an anthropologist who has just completed a study of Wall Street, will it take more than anything you've heard about financial regulatory overhaul, reform of corporate governance, and things of that sort to change the culture? I mean, very often it takes a long time to change culture. Do you think we've got enough measures in place to do that, number one? And number two, thinking even more broadly to the question our panel was here to address, are U.S. economic policies sustainable? Do we have the culture and the machinery in place to make meaningful change there?
Well, that's quite a tall order to answer in a couple of minutes, given that most of you are probably dying to dash out to your next appointment. But I'll make this point, which is that I'm a firm believer that rules alone are not going to fix the problem. If you look back at innovation in finance over the last century, much of that has been in response to the last set of rules that were slapped on the industry, and bankers have developed creative ways to get around the last set of rules, and I suspect that will happen again. But I also am a firm believer that sunlight is a very good disinfectant, not just against corruption, but wild, crazy excess. And I think a key reason why the excess is built up in finance goes back to the iceberg image I started with before, which is that there was this vast shadowy area of activity that no one was watching. So to end on a slightly positive note, I'd say it's fantastic that at least society is having a serious debate now about the way that banking is run. The tragedy is that too many people were willing to ignore banking. Too many people were willing to leave banking purely in the hands of bankers for far too long. And if harder questions had been asked at an earlier stage about finance, we might not be in the mess we are in today. And I hope that's a moral that applies not just to banking, but to the healthcare sector and many of the other problems which America is grappling with today, where they seem technical, they seem complex. It's very tempting to leave it in the hands of specialists. But if we do that, we'll see the type of tragedy we've seen unfold in the banking sector unfold over and over again.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the panel, and please join me in a round of applause for this. Thank all of you for coming. We're now adjourned. The CED has much to do, it is clear from this afternoon's discussion.